Thank you very much, Secretary General. And may I just add very briefly to our previous speakers, thank you very much for sticking to the time. It's a great challenge, this, and thank you all for being here.
All the previous speakers?
I haven't dealt with yours yet. This comes now. I'm going to ask you the easy question first, if that's okay. And in all my conversations with previous Secretary Generals, I always start with the easy question because I'm always afraid they will walk away if I start with the difficult ones.
But I will leave early.
No, we'll let you leave on time. My first question, and interesting, the Wise Men's report didn't make one reference to the EU because the EU really didn't exist at that time. It's going to be celebrating, we hope celebrating, not commemorating, its 60th anniversary in Rome in March. My question is this, if you look ahead, how do you really see the NATO-EU relationship developing?
I see the NATO-EU relationship really developing in a positive way. I think that's something that we have achieved together, NATO and the European Union, on many different levels, from the top political leadership in EU, working with the leadership in NATO with me and staff-to-staff talks. We have really been able to strengthen the political cooperation between NATO and the European Union. We have just agreed last week on a package. We endorsed a package of more than 40 concrete measures on how to further strengthen our cooperation on a wide range of different topics. And the NATO-EU cooperation has always been important, but in many ways I think it's even more important now, because we face new kinds of security threats, which are this combination of military and non-military means of aggression. Hybrid cyber threats really calls upon the joint efforts of NATO and the European Union, so we work there. And we also have seen the will in the European Union to strengthen European defense. We welcome that, but of course it has to be done in a way which is not competing with NATO, but complementary. So all this calls upon more NATO-EU cooperation, and we are really delivering. I'm quite impressed by the way we have been able to move forward.
You brought up this issue. I mean, do you worry about the competitiveness? I mean, frankly, both organisations do compete with each other in some ways, whether nobody wants to say this inside NATO or the EU, but they're both completely different cultural mindsets. But do you really think that, I mean, how would it work in detail? Would one do the soft power? Would the other do the hard power? What's the nature of this complementarity?
EU has some capabilities, and NATO has some capabilities, but none of us have all the tools to respond to all the different security challenges we are faced to. So therefore, if we combine, we are able to provide a formidable force. And that's exactly what we do, for instance, when we address hybrid threats. One of the things we have done is to develop a playbook describing who's going to do what. If one of our member countries are under hybrid attacks, we need to defend infrastructure, we need to look at energy security, we need to defend our cyber networks. EU has some capabilities, we have some capabilities, we have to make sure that they work together. NATO has some unique capabilities, for instance, when it comes to collective defense, major military operations. We have the command structure, which the European Union do not have. But I think that we have a much more relaxed relationship to these issues now than my impression was the case 10 or 20 years ago.
Indeed.
So it's easy to work together with...
Do you think the EU should have its own command structure?
The EU should not develop command structures which are shaped like or compete with NATO. They need, of course, the ability to plan and to conduct the kind of military presence which we have seen the EU has, for instance, in parts of Africa. But it's absolutely possible to do that without competing or establishing something which is competing with or parallel structures of NATO. And my impression, after attending several EU ministerial meetings, but also I'm going later on Thursday, I will attend the European Union Summit, and what they have told me again and again, the EU leaders, is that this is not about creating a European army. This is not about competing with the NATO. This is not about creating parallel command structures, but this is about strengthening European defense.
Yeah.
And stronger European defense, that is something NATO is in favor of, because we have asked the Europeans to invest more in capabilities, to increase defense spending, to coordinate more their efforts. That will strengthen Europe, the European Union, and NATO. And therefore I welcome it, as long as we avoid the pitfalls where the European Union start to compete with NATO.
Now, I'm intrigued by this answer. Now, imagine if you told a teenager this, having EU defence ambitions, you have NATO. Imagine if a teenager said to you, well, why don't you just join together?
Well, I have tried twice to convince Norway to join the European Union, and that was not a success. That's the problem with democracies, is that you cannot just decide in Brussels. There are some people out there, and they have different views on, for instance, both NATO and the European Union.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So the reality is that Canada and the United States, they will never become members of the European Union. But they, of course, contribute to Europe, the security of Europe. Norway, well, you can try. Good luck. But I have lost 2 referendums, so I know exactly how to lose them, not to win them.
Yes.
And then you have Turkey. So the thing is that there are 6 allies.
Yes.
Norway, Iceland in the north, Canada, United States in the west, Albania and Turkey in the southeast, which all are essential for the security of Europe. 80% of NATO's defense spending after Brexit will be non-EU. 3 of the 4 battalions which we'll have in the eastern part of the alliance will be led by non-EU allies. So there's no way. So we have to work together to protect Europe.
Well, just before we end this discussion on the EU NATO, and I see our Turkish ambassador here. I mean, I wasn't actually thinking of those not in EU joining EU, those in NATO, or those not in the EU joining NATO. I was thinking of maybe a different kind of Atlanticist construction. I'm just throwing it out the idea before my next difficult question.
But what we said last week when we agreed at the NATO Foreign Ministerial meeting on these more than 42 concrete measures was that this is the beginning.
Okay.
This is not the end.
No.
So now we have delivered a package. We will implement that package. And you have to remember that just this year we have been able to agree on a technical arrangement when it comes to cyber cooperation between NATO and the EU.
Yes.
We have reached agreement on how to work together with the European Union in the Aegean Sea. This is 2 formal arrangements this year, and that is more than we have agreed with the European Union over the last decade. So we are making progress in NATO-EU cooperation, and maybe that we should create a big council sometime in the future. But so that will be later on.
By the way, you never did mention, you were quite modest, you never did mention that you negotiated the Norwegian border deal with Russia.
No, but Russia is not a member of the European Union.
No,
so,
nor NATO. Nor NATO. But it brings me to my next question. Now, it's interesting, the Warsaw Summit and the EU Global Global Action Plan, both of them make references to resilience. And resilience has different meanings. But as an EU citizen, and although my country isn't in NATO, but that's another story. I mean, resilience is not just about outside our neighbourhood. It's about being able to recover quickly in an event. It doesn't even have to be a terrorist attack, but an explosion of some sort, the degradation of the railway system, what the enormous effect it would have on Western democracies. Is NATO ready for this resilience?
Yes, and we are stepping up our efforts because we see more threats and challenges related to, for instance, civilian infrastructure. And again, this is an area where we work closer together with the European Union. But recently we also agreed on guidelines for how to have this necessary resilience and sustainability of our different kinds of civilian infrastructure. Energy, the continuation of government, and cyber and so on. So these are issues which we are now also doing more to address. Resilience was one of the key issues we addressed at the Warsaw Summit. So we are ready, but we also understand that we need to do more. So that's something we are working on.
But you brought up this consensus thing. I don't mean to call it a thing,
no.
but this consensus. You know how debilitating how debilitating it is. But Imagine if part of the railway or the airport system was destroyed. How could NATO and the EU, particularly NATO, kick in really quickly to respond to
So
this?
first of all, the first responder is always the nation. And the whole idea is to enable them to take care of their own railway systems or ports or whatever it is. But then, of course, both NATO and the EU have different capabilities to assist and help different member nations. Partly by providing guidelines to set some kind of standards for what kind of quality and what kind of systems the different nations have to have in place to protect their systems and to re-establish them if they are under attack. And that's especially when it comes to cyber. We have developed that by also having teams in NATO being able to deploy quickly out to a member state and help them to protect their cyber systems if they are under attack. But the main focus is always what can we do to enable nations to protect their own systems and to have the quality on infrastructure which is good enough.
This is really interesting. You mentioned the cybersecurity issue. Given the whole, the constant worries by the Baltic states particularly, but we've seen it with the German Bundestag, we've seen what has happened to the communication system there. Last week, the Deutsche Telekom was attacked. Do you think Article 5 should be updated to include this idea of cybersecurity? Because these nations are threatened and they are coming under a new kind of modern attack. Should Article 5 be updated?
Article 5 is already updated because NATO is a modern alliance and we have agreed that a cyber attack can trigger our collective defense. So actually, cyber attack is now regarded as serious as a conventional or another kind of military attack. Because we know that cyber attack can destroy infrastructure, it can also cause the casualties, human casualties. So we have already defined cyber that cyber attacks can trigger Article 5. But more than that, we also decided at the Warsaw Summit in July that we will establish cyber as a military domain. We have sea, land, and air, but now we also have cyber. Because it's impossible to imagine a military conflict without the cyber dimension. And we have to be able to protect our own networks, being it when we are in operations in Afghanistan or in Kosovo, and any military conflict will have a cyber dimension. So cyber is part of Article 5.
But to have, that's interesting. You don't have to change the text of Article 5 clearly, but it's implied. No. If you say that NATO is prepared for this and updating it, I wonder about this. What about the interoperability issue? Because one of the weaknesses of NATO is, in fact, not the lack, that's far too strong, but interoperability is a problem, not only between the European allies, but particularly between some of the European allies and the United States. I mean, this all plays into resilience and cybersecurity. Do you worry about the lack of, or this issue of interoperability?
I will not say I'm worried, but we are focused and we are very much aware of the importance of interoperability. And as you said, interoperability is perhaps one of the most important tasks of NATO, to make sure that forces from 28 nations, soon to be 29, and also with partner nations, are able to really work together and to fight together. And that needs a very high degree of interoperability, both when it comes to equipment, that the equipment can work together, but also command, control, that we understand when we talk to each other. And of course, we always have, room for improvements. But I think that one of the lessons we learned in, for instance, Afghanistan, a big military operation where hundreds of thousands of soldiers from European or from NATO allied countries and partner countries have participated. We learned that we had to develop better interoperability, and actually we have been able to do so, partly based on big military operations like Afghanistan, but also more and more training. So one of the reasons why we are now doing more exercises is to increase our ability to work very closely together.
But interoperability is just not about military capabilities and making things click together. No. It's also about, I suppose, the interoperability of trust. I mean, and intelligence sharing. And let's leave aside the EU, intelligence is a different matter. I mean, the intelligence sharing is a problem inside NATO.
Of course, we can be better, and that's the reason why we have just established a new division in NATO, and a division which is only going to be working with intelligence. And we have just appointed a new Assistant Secretary General for intelligence. And the reason that we have established a new division, and the reason why we are going to have a new Assistant Secretary General, or already appointed him, is that we can do more when it comes to both improve the way we collect intelligence, but also the way we share and understand and analyze intelligence. And that again, it has always been important, but in a more unpredictable and more uncertain security environment, with all the instability we see in Iraq, Syria, North Africa, and around NATO. Of course, the importance of early warning, the importance of situational awareness, the importance of sharing intelligence has just become even more important.
Yes, but I mean, this is where the Three Wise Men report is still relevant, because they discussed in detail the idea of trust and the lack of trust. But intelligence requires trust.
Yeah.
And, you know, frankly, it would be hard to see. I see Ambassador Luth there. Hello, Ambassador. It would be hard to imagine, you know, maybe the Americans sharing intelligence with certain other NATO countries. I mean, this isn't there yet, the full... well, trust is a very difficult commodity in any case. But a little bit more trust is needed inside NATO.
But, you know, NATO is the most successful military alliance in history. And that is because we have made a strong political commitment to defend each other, to stand together, and to provide the necessary deterrence to prevent the conflict. The reason for NATO to be strong is not because we want to provoke a conflict, but because we know that as long as we are strong, as long as we are united, we prevent the conflict. And of course, if we trust each other to fight together, then we should also trust each other to share intelligence. And we are sharing intelligence. And also some big allies, which of course have more intelligence than smaller allies. Actually, I know about one small ally which has a lot of intelligence up north.
Yes?
But
and you're not going to share it?
It
depends.
I think they're quite
Case
good
by
at sharing
case.
it too. Yeah. So we have mechanisms and systems for sharing intelligence, but of course always some nations will perhaps keep some intelligence just for themselves. But we have developed, we have a long history of sharing intelligence, much more than any other international institution or organization.
Well, that's not much of a comparison, because other international organizations are different.
That's true,
You
but
know,
I just
so,
used
I
the
mean, I can't
example
let you
because
get
it sounded good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, yes. Now, since you bring in this, the North and the intelligence, it brings us to Russia, because this all feeds into resilience, cyber warfare, hybrid warfare. First of all, the easy question. Inside NATO, is there now a common threat perception about Russia?
Yes, and more important, it is a common agreement on how to approach Russia, based on the strong message from Warsaw that we want a strong, firm alliance, delivering the necessary defense and deterrence, but at the same time striving for a more constructive and cooperative relationship with Russia, keeping the channels for political dialogue open, and trying to keep tensions down, avoid escalating the situation, and avoiding a new Cold War or a new arms race. This is a balance. This is not always easy, but we have a very strong united position in NATO that is what we are working for. And I have many times used my own experience as a Norwegian politician, that even during the coldest period of the Cold War, Norway bordering Soviet Union and then later Russia, were able to have a pragmatic working relationship with Russia on energy, on border relations, on military matters, on visa-free travel, on fishing quotas, and a lot of things. And that was not despite of Norway's membership in NATO, but it was because of Norway's membership in NATO, because that provided the predictability, the platform for a small nation as NATO to engage with Russia. That benefited Norway, but it also benefited Russia. And for instance,
Yeah.
when you agreed on the borderline up in the Barents Sea, now both Russia and Norway is exploring for oil up there,
Yes.
which would not have been possible without the borderline. So this is good for Russia, good for Norway, and good for everyone.
Well, since you bring up Norway, well, I mean, then it brings up the whole Arctic issue, which I presume will become a political discussion inside NATO.
Yeah, but the Arctic issue is, I think we have to remember that in the Arctic area we have seen more military presence, we have seen also more Russian military presence, but at the same time I think the Arctic issue is also an area where we have been able to maintain cooperation and maintain a relatively low level of tensions. I know that several NATO allies, Canada, United States, Norway, Denmark, work closely with Russia in the Arctic Council. The Norwegian army meet every week with the Russian army, the 6th Fleet up in the north, and discuss search and rescue and other issues. So in the Arctic area, we have managed, in close cooperation with Russia, to at least avoid the same tensions and problems we have seen in other parts of Europe.
Secretary General, I'm going to stop now because I'm sure everybody wants to ask you questions. And I didn't mention the T word, by the way. No doubt somebody will want transatlanticism, Trump-Atlanticism. So if anybody likes, we have 5 minutes. We're going to stick to a very tight shot. One question, identify as a first year, second year, third year. Yes, please. Keep it, yes, you. And identify yourself, keep it very direct. We have very little time. Thank you. They're over there, Maria, back at the back. And there was the question here, raise your hand again.
Thank you very much. My name is Muhammad Rajai Barakat. What do you think about the liberation of Aleppo by Syrian army, Russians? Don't you think that as Europeans we have to be happy that Russia and the Syrian army are fighting against ISIS? ISIS and the others are our enemies. But I noticed that it's not the case. Thank you very much.
Okay, next we'll take the Secretary. We'll take the next question, please. Identify yourself.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Dr. Niklas Novaki, and I'm happy to bring up the T word, as you mentioned. There is some anxiety about the incoming Trump administration, and that the U.S. ties to its European allies might weaken. So since the topic was civil, non-military cooperation, so what can NATO do to ensure that unity among its European allies will be strong despite of what happens across the Atlantic?
Thank you. And the third question here, and then we go on to another group of questions. Thank you.
Julian Barnes with the Wall Street Journal. To follow up on your cyber question, could interference in a political election by a foreign power constitute an Article 5 situation?
Great. Thank you, Julian. Thank you very much. So, Secretary General, I think we should work backwards. The cybersecurity Article 5.
So first of all, any interference, outside interference in a democratic election is of course unacceptable, and it's important that all facts that we have all facts on the table. But it is up to the United States and the U.S. authorities now to decide the next steps on how to look into the alleged meddling or interference in the U.S. elections. What I can say is that we have seen more and more reports about states being behind cyber attacks against NATO allies. And that's one of the reasons why we are stepping up our efforts to strengthen our cyber defenses, to strengthen the cyber defenses of NATO networks, but also help allies to strengthen their defenses. And one important part of that is, of course, to develop the techniques to make sure that we are able to attribute who is behind, because that's one of the important and difficult challenges related to cyber attacks, is that you don't always know who is attacking you. So attribution is a key issue and one of the key challenges we are addressing.
The European allies reassuring the other side.
The transatlantic bond,
yes.
Yeah. First of all, we are an alliance of democracies, and in democracies, people elect different political leaders coming from different political parties. That has always been the case in NATO. And we have seen different political leaders from different political families disagreeing on many different issues. And that will always be the case in an alliance of 28 democracies. So different views, open debates, discussions, disagreements is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength, as long as we are able to agree on the most important thing. And that is that we stand together and defend each other. And that has been the case, and I'm for almost 7 decades, and I'm absolutely certain that that will continue to be the case. Yes, there are different views, different opinions, but yes, we are always able to agree on the core task of NATO to defend each other, and I'm absolutely certain that the US will continue to maintain its NATO commitments.
Look forward to the Brussels summit. A question, the ISIS question.
Sorry,
please.
Aleppo is a humanitarian catastrophe which has become even worse because of the renewed offensive by the Assad regime, supported by Russia. The important thing now is to do whatever possible to have a ceasefire, cessation of hostilities as soon as possible, and then enable resumption of humanitarian aid and have a ceasefire, which can be then the first step towards a political solution to the conflict in Syria.
Would you have time for another set? To be very brief, I promise.
Yeah, very brief.
Thank you. Okay, 3 more questions. One here, second, and okay, well, there's only 2. I think that's Pauline Massard. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Pauline Massard from Friends of Europe. Secretary General, you mentioned resilience, obviously, and you mentioned that we are 28 democracies, but we're seeing very, very dangerous paths being taken throughout several allies. It would be too easy to focus only on Turkey. Does NATO have a plan for resilience for when we are still 28, but not all democracies?
Oh, okay, and there was a question near you, Pauline. Somebody put up their hand. Yes, please.
Tom Sauer, professor from the University of Antwerp here in Belgium, about nuclear weapons policy, also more political than military, maybe. Now, all NATO member states are also members of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They have the obligations to start negotiations to eliminate nuclear weapons. Now, in 2017, multilateral negotiations will be started up for a nuclear weapons ban treaty, a first step towards elimination in the United Nations. So how do you explain that all NATO member states, except the Netherlands, voted against that proposal a couple of weeks ago?
Thank you. No, okay, we're going to stop here. Will you take the nuclear question and then...
Because we believe that the best way to address the important issue of nuclear disarmament is to use existing tools, like, for instance, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We think to establish other platforms will only undermine the important work which takes place in the NPT. So NATO has clearly stated that we will remain a nuclear alliance as long as there are nuclear weapons in the world. But we have also stated that our long-term goal is a world without nuclear weapons. But we do not believe that the world becomes safer if we have unilateral nuclear disarmament. So NATO and NATO allies, especially the United States, have actually been able to agree on substantial reductions in the number of nuclear warheads, and the United States has also clearly conveyed the message that they are ready to continue to reduce, but it has to be a balanced reduction. So we don't believe that to establish other platforms for addressing the same issue will make it easier. Actually, we believe it will make that work more difficult.
I know you're running late. The last question, resilience and democracies.
So we are always in favor of resilience among all NATO allies. And I don't know exactly what you are, hinting at, but democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty are core values for NATO. And I have stressed the importance of respecting these core values in my meetings with many NATO leaders. And they are important because I'm absolutely certain that in the long run, open democratic societies are more resilient than closed autocratic societies. So I really believe that democracy will win because we are stronger when we are open and democratic than when we try to be autocratic and not respect democratic values.
Your time is up. Thank you for giving us an extra round. Everybody remain seated. Thank you very much, Secretary General.
Thank you.
Very pleased to meet you. Thank you. Thank you.